Hey everybody, it's Library Carrie and
Library Andy.
And it is, I'm still pre-recording because of my vacation. So I am now reading for early chapter book. Thursday, July 13th is what I'm recording right now. And on Thursday, I will be racing at Great Bend, Kansas. I don't remember the name of the track there, just Great Bend, Kansas is where I will be on Thursday, July 13th. We are starting a new early chapter book today. This is called The Show and Tell War and Other Stories About Adam Joshua by Janice Lee Smith. And I have not read this, but I saw it on the shelf and thought it looked interesting. So chapter 1 is called Starting Up. Let me set my timer. Here we go. Adam Joshua didn't mind school, but it always came when he least expected it and usually when he had the most to do. It was back. He wasn't ready. He had planned to do a lot of things this summer and none of them were finished yet. Some of them weren't even started. For one thing, he and his best friend Nelson had planned to do a bunch of things to the treehouse they shared together. Adam Joshua wasn't exactly sure what all of them were, but he knew they would have gotten around to most of them sooner or later. Also, Adam Joshua thought he had wanted to work more at teaching his dog George tricks. George had a long way to go before he knew most of the things a dog was supposed to know. Adam Joshua stopped thinking and looked around his room for George. His closet door was open, and George was in there, buried in the piles on the floor, chewing on toys and having a terrific time. Adam Joshua crawled in the closet too and started unburying George. There was a crayon on one of the piles, and Adam Joshua scooted the rest of the pile over so he'd have room to sit on the closet floor and make a list on the closet wall. Treehouse, he wrote. George. Adam Joshua thought. He wrote Amanda Jane on the list because his baby sister needed to learn as much as George, and it was up to him to teach her. Write a book, he added. He had never told anybody he wanted to write a book, but he did. He always thought he'd use one summer to do it, but he hadn't yet. Things to do next summer, he wrote at the top of his list so he wouldn't forget which list it was. Then he took 3 comic books off the top of George, took a Space Spy from his mouth, and dragged him out of the closet and slammed the closet door. Adam Joshua went up to the treehouse to see if Nelson was there. He thought if he told Nelson the way he was feeling about school, maybe he'd feel better about it. Nelson started talking the minute Adam Joshua showed up. It's not that I mind school, Adam Joshua, Nelson said. I even like school, but I had a lot of things I thought I'd do this summer, and there's only a week of summer left, and I haven't done most of them yet. Adam Joshua started to say something about his list. And Nelson went right on, I've really been worrying about starting school. There are a lot of things to worry about. Adam Joshua hadn't gotten around to worrying yet. For instance, said Nelson, I'm scared to death that Zed Davis will be in my class again. Last year he kept taking my milk money and pouring glue on my desk, and once at recess he sat on top of me until the bell rang. All of a sudden, Adam Joshua felt awful. He'd forgotten that he had to worry about a boy named Elliot Banks being in his room again this year. And, said Nelson, I'm terrible at math, especially anything that has a 6 in it. It seems to me, he said, shaking his head, that they use more 6s every year. Then, said Nelson, I know we're not going to get to be together because we never get to be together, and I'm worried about the kind of teacher I'm going to get. Nelson stopped to take a breath, and Adam Joshua started to say something. But most of all, said Nelson, I'm really going to miss my fish. Adam Joshua hated Nelson's fish, but he could understand that Nelson might miss them because he was going to miss George. I feel a lot better now, Nelson said, watching Adam Joshua climb down the treehouse ladder. Was there anything special you wanted to talk about? He asked. Not a thing, Adam Joshua said, going back into his house so he could put a few more lists on his closet wall. George slept on Adam Joshua's stomach each night, and each night Adam Joshua told George the things that he worried about most. Once in a while George listened, but usually he fell asleep. In the nights before school started, George slept through Adam Joshua's worrying about a lot of things. Adam Joshua worried about his L's, the way Nelson worried about 6s. Every time Adam Joshua wrote an L, it seemed to turn around the other way, which didn't bother him at all, but it seemed to bother the teachers quite a bit. I'm going to get another teacher like that, Adam Joshua told George. Someone who's going to worry about L's all the time. Last year he'd had 2 teachers. The first was Mrs. Thomas. And she was great, Adam Joshua told George, but then she moved and Mrs. Lucas came. George slept with his ears flopped down low over his eyes. Adam Joshua lifted one of them to make sure George heard this part. Mrs. Lucas was awful, he said. Mrs. Lucas looked mad all the time, mostly at him. Mrs. Lucas yelled all the time, mostly at him. Mrs. Lucas thought Elliot Banks couldn't do anything wrong and that Adam Joshua couldn't do anything right. Adam Joshua didn't think he could take another year with somebody like Mrs. Lucas. Or Elliot Banks either, Adam Joshua said, lifting George's ear again. Elliot Banks was the kind of kid teachers loved and kids hated. Elliot Banks had plenty of money and all kinds of toys, and he was smart in every subject and used a sort of manners adults thought were great. A lot they knew, Adam Joshua told George. The worst thing about Elliot Banks was that he hated Adam Joshua, so all last year Adam Joshua had to put up with being hated. Between Mrs. Lucas and Elliot Banks, Adam Joshua had spent a lot of time down the hall in the bathroom, sitting on the floor and talking to a spider who lived up in a corner of the ceiling. I don't know what I would have done without her, Adam Joshua told George. Her name was Alice, and she was nearly as good at listening as you are. George started snoring. Above Adam Joshua's bed was a poster of his favorite hero, Superman. Adam Joshua planned to be as much like Superman as he could when he grew up. He thought they were pretty much alike already. They both had muscles, and they both were brave, and one of them could handle anything that came along. Superman had an arch-enemy named Lex Luthor. Adam Joshua had an arch-enemy named Elliot Banks. Adam Joshua didn't think Superman had ever really needed to go to school a day in his life. He only went to keep everybody else happy, Adam Joshua told George. He fell asleep thinking that he was only going to school to keep everybody happy too. After breakfast, the first morning of school, Adam Joshua packed his backpack. He put in pencils and scissors and a ruler. He packed paper and a folder to hold his papers. He put in 3 of his favorite Superman comics and several of his space spies and a banana. He stuffed a Superman cape down on top of everything else so he could get to it in a hurry in case it was needed. And he pushed everything down with his foot until he could get the zipper closed. Adam Joshua went to say goodbye to Amanda Jane. She was sitting in her high chair, banging a cup with one hand and a spoon with the other. In between the banging, she was eating pieces of banana and apple and throwing pieces of cereal down to George, who was waiting for them beneath her high chair. I'm leaving now, Adam Joshua told her. I don't want you to cry. Amanda Jane reached out and banged him on the head with her spoon. I'm going to be in school all day, Adam Joshua told her, but I don't want you to worry. Amanda Jane leaned over the edge of her high chair and threw 2 pieces of cereal down to George. Adam Joshua bent to talk with George and tried to find a clean place to sit. I know it's going to be awful without me here, Adam Joshua said. George pushed his nose against Adam Joshua's knee to get at a piece of cereal. But I want you to be brave about it, said Adam Joshua. George growled and bit at Adam Joshua's pant leg, trying to get the cereal. Amanda Jane leaned over from her high chair and dropped a piece of banana in Adam Joshua's ear. Adam Joshua hugged his mother and hugged Amanda Jane and kissed George. He stood with Nelson to look at the treehouse for a minute, and then they turned their backs on it and began to walk to school. All right, I'm only about 8 minutes in, but my camera battery is going dead. So I'm going to stop here, charge up my camera, and then I will be back to finish our 20 minutes for today. Looks like I've got about 12 minutes left. So I will see you back in a few. Thanks.